Proteins, enzymes, and mineral metabolism is what I plan to cover. Now, Dr. Advait and Dr. Gauri, they have given you the outline of what happens in the exams and what are the topics that need to be studied for the exam. What are the kind of MCQs or SEQs, what is the paper pattern. So all of you are aware now that we don't really have any options. Now, many a time what happens with students is that you tend to study from a question bank. So I've seen many of my students say that, okay, like Bhalani revise kar liya, so they think that, okay, I'm sorted for the exams. But Bhalani only gives you questions which have been asked till date. It doesn't tell you about the questions that are going to come. And every year I see that there are at least a few questions which are, like at least one is SEQ is an unexpected one. So I would ask you people to go through the syllabus properly. Don't leave anything in the option, because finally in the final exam, there is going to be no option for you. So it's better to be well prepared. Okay, so let's start with proteins now. Proteins happen to be a very important component of our diet, and they are needed to carry out many important functions in the body. For a growing child, about 1 to 2 grams per kg body weight of protein is required daily, whereas for adults, about 1 gram per kg body weight should be enough. Now, let's see what the protein structure. They happen to be L-alpha amino acids. Okay. Now, these amino acids, they happen to be simple organic compounds which contain both a carboxyl acid group as well as an amino group. But other than this, they also contain a side chain or an R group, which is very specific for each amino acid. Now, there are many different kinds of amino acids that are present, but as part of the protein structure, when the protein is synthesized, there are only codons available for 20 amino acids. The 21st amino acid has been discovered. So I suggest that all of you should at least know the names of the 20 standard amino acids and the 3-letter abbreviations by which these amino acids are known. Now, amino acids can be classified in many different ways, and these questions have been often asked in the exams. Now, let's start with one classification. Unfortunately, for the dental students, you're not expected to remember the structure. So this becomes, I mean, you have to remember this classification this way. So classification based on the side chains. You've got amino acids with aliphatic side chains, and these would be glycine, alanine, valine, leucine, and isoleucine. Those with aromatic side chains are tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine. Those that contain sulfur in their side chains are methionine and cysteine. The OH group containing amino acids, the serine and threonine, tyrosine can also be considered here. Those with side chains which have got acidic groups, that's glutamic acid and aspartic acid, and their amides happen to be glutamine and asparagine respectively. The side chains which have basic groups happen to be lysine, arginine, and histidine. And the only amino acid that does not contain a primary amino group, instead it contains an imino group. This happens to be proline. So at this point, I would also like to say that amino acids, when they react with ninhydrin, they give you a very characteristic blue-purple color. So proline happens to be the only amino acid that does not give this blue color with ninhydrin. Instead, it gives a yellow color. So these two questions could be asked in the form of MCQs in the exam. The other way of classifying amino acids, which is again be asked in the form of an SAQ, is the nutritional classification. So generally हम लोग कैसे याद रखते हैं? Essential amino acids, non-essential amino acids, and semi-essential. But the word actually is nutritionally essential. So when I say an amino acid is nutritionally essential, it simply means that these amino acids cannot be synthesized in the diet. So they have to be necessarily, they have to be part of the proteins that we consume in our diet. Now, there are many mnemonics available to remember these essential amino acids. So, for example, one of them could be AVHIL-MPTT. And here it's arginine, valine, histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, and tryptophan. So remember that tyrosine is not, though it also begins with T, it is not an essential amino acid. And the A here stands for arginine. The other class is nutritionally non-essential. These amino acids are equally important for protein synthesis, but even if they are not provided in the diet, our body has the capability to synthesize them. So besides those 10 essential amino acids, the remaining 10 amino acids would be called as nutritionally non-essential amino acids. For example, phenylalanine happens to be an essential amino acid that can be converted to tyrosine in the body. Or for example, you've got methionine, which is the sulfur-containing amino acid that can be converted to cysteine in our body. Two of the amino acids, that is arginine and histidine, they're also called as semi-essential. What it means is that though they are synthesized in the body, for a growing child, what is synthesized may not be enough to satisfy the requirements for protein synthesis, whereas in adults, whatever is synthesized is enough. So even if it's not supplied in the diet in adulthood, it's absolutely okay. So nutritionally essential, nutritionally non-essential, and semi-essential. Now, based on metabolic fate also, amino acids are classified as being glucogenic, ketogenic, or both. So first you try to remember the ones which are ketogenic. So you have leucine and lysine which are exclusively ketogenic, which means इन दोनों को छोड़ा तो बचे हुए जितने आपके 18 amino acids हैं, all of them have the capability to synthesize glucose. So Shinde sir just told you that you have this process called as gluconeogenesis, which is the process wherein carbohydrates are synthesized from non-carbohydrate precursors, or glucose is synthesized from non-carbohydrate precursors. So one such thing could be these glucogenic amino acids. Now amino acids, PITT, you can remember Brad Pitt. Okay, so PITT here, so it's phenylalanine, isoleucine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. So you have all the three aromatic amino acids and isoleucine. These amino acids are both glucogenic as well as ketogenic. Okay, now there are other classifications also. We'll not delve into it now. We'll move on to classification of proteins, again, which can be classified in many different ways. But one of the most important classification is that based on physical and chemical properties, and proteins can be classified as being simple proteins, conjugated proteins, and derived proteins. Now, what are simple proteins? ये वो proteins है जिनको अगर hydrolysis किया जाए, so they'll only give you a mixture of amino acids and nothing else. So they're only made up of amino acids. Okay, so either amino acids or their derivatives. Now, इसमें जो है आपके globular proteins and fibrous proteins आते हैं. They can be further classified as being albumins, globulins, glutamines, prolamines, histones, protamines, etc. Then you have conjugated proteins. Now, these are those proteins which, when they undergo hydrolysis, besides the protein part, they also give you something that's called as the non-protein part. And this non-protein part is what is called as the prosthetic group. Depending upon what is the prosthetic group, these conjugated proteins could be called as glycoproteins, wherein, as the name indicates, the conjugated part is the carbohydrate moiety. For example, mucin happens to be a glycoprotein. Okay, so if you talk about casein, casein happens to be a phosphoprotein. When we talk about hemoglobin, globin is the protein part, heme is the prosthetic group that is attached to it. When so I said lipoproteins, the lipid is the prosthetic group, and so on. And then you have the derived proteins. These are those proteins which are formed from simple and conjugated proteins. This could be by the action of an acid, it could be by the action of an enzyme, or because of change in pH, or because of the action of some agent like, very strong heat or ultraviolet radiations, etc. So these proteins are referred to as derived proteins. Derived proteins could be primary derived proteins or secondary derived proteins. Let's take an example. For example, during the process of digestion, you have pepsinogen that gets converted to pepsin. So here you have pepsin would be considered to be a protein that is derived from pepsinogen. Okay, so a fibrinogen getting converted to fibrin. Or for that matter, collagen, when it is appropriately treated, that collagen gets converted to gelatin. So gelatin is a protein that is derived from collagen. Okay. The other very important classification that's been asked so many times in the exam in the form of an SAQ is the functional classification of proteins. Now, what we need to remember is that proteins are the building blocks of the body. So they always perform brick and mortar functions. They can also be called upon as a source of energy. When you're writing this answer, try to enlist the functions that are carried out by the proteins. You can add one sentence about each of them, and then you should be able to give examples, right? So for example, when we say catalytic proteins, we are talking about enzymes. So in the form of enzymes, proteins are able to catalyze reactions in the body. You can give examples like hexokinase, pyruvate dehydrogenase, etc. When we say transport protein, an example would be hemoglobin, which is involved in the transport of gases. Of example, you have transferrin, which is involved in the transport of iron. You have storage proteins. These are those proteins which perform the function of storage. So you have ferritin, which is involved in storing iron. Contractile proteins, actin and myosin, this play a very important role in muscle contraction. Structural proteins, so they provide support, strength, and rigidity. They act as external exoskeleton structures also. For example, keratin, that's present in the hair, nail, hooves, etc. You also have collagen and elastin, which can be considered as structural proteins. Defense proteins, these are those proteins which play an important role in the defense of the body. For example, immunoglobulins, okay? Venom in the case of the venom protein present in snakes also can be considered as a defense protein for that organism. Regulatory protein. Here in regulatory proteins, we are talking about proteins which perform important functions of regulation. And here we are talking about, for example, we are talking about insulin. Insulin happens to be a protein that performs very important functions of regulating the blood sugar level. And when we talk about genetic proteins, these are those proteins, for example, you have histones, they associate themselves with the DNA, and they are involved in the function of DNA and RNA. The other important question that's routinely asked from protein chemistry happens to be the levels of organization. Now remember this, please do not confuse this with a way of classifying proteins. These are simply the way in which a protein organizes itself. Okay, so every protein has got a native structure. What is this native structure? That native structure, it is the state in which the protein is able to perform its biological activity. And this native structure is unique to each protein, right? Now, what determines this native structure is the number and the sequence of the amino acids. Now, there are 4 levels of organization, which would simply be called as primary level, secondary level, the tertiary level, and the quaternary level. So what is the primary level? A primary level is when the amino acids simply link up with the help of peptide linkages. They form a linear structure, and this linear structure is the most stable level of organization. The protein is extremely long in this. Then the protein organizes itself. It forms a helical structure with the help of hydrogen bonds. These hydrogen bonds could be intramolecular or intermolecular hydrogen bonds, which are weak interactions, but they stabilize the structure. This forms the secondary level of organization. You find that many of the fibrous proteins, they exist in secondary level of organization. So for example, you have keratin. Okay, so or self-fibroin, these are all examples. So alpha helix, beta pleated structure, these are all examples of the secondary level of organization. Now the proteins which are involved in transport functions, the proteins which act as enzymes or as hormones, they need to keep traveling. So therefore they further organize themselves to form a very compact structure that's called as the tertiary level of organization. Here you find many more weak interactions which are able to stabilize the protein structure. So you have hydrophobic forces, hydrostatic forces of attraction. You've got the electrostatic forces of attraction or hydrophobic interactions, etc. And these interactions will then stabilize the protein in the secondary, in the tertiary level of organization. And lastly, we have the quaternary level of organization. And in quaternary level, what happens is that this is only seen in those proteins that contain more than one polypeptide chain. For example, you've got hemoglobin. So hemoglobin has got 4 chains, and each of these chains cannot function individually. So the organization that makes this all the 4 chains together to act as one functional unit is what is called as the quaternary level of organization. Now, when certain agents, it could be a strong acid or some dehydrating agents or ultraviolet radiations, X-rays, etc., when they act upon the proteins, the weak interactions may be broken. And this leads to the opening of the or breakdown of the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary level of organization. This will result in loss of the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the protein. And this is what is called as denaturation. So denaturation can be simply defined as the disorganization of the native structure of the protein. Okay. Now, in some cases, when the denaturating agent is carefully removed, the process can be reversed and the protein can fold itself back exactly in the same way. The process would then be called as renaturation. So renaturation is nothing but reversible denaturation. In the case of DNA also, we speak when the double-stranded DNA undergoes separation. So it is called as the melting. When the 2 strands come together again, it's called as annealing. So there's a similar process, denaturation and renaturation. Okay. Now I'm not going to go into the digestion part of it. All of you should remember the various compartments in which protein digestion takes place. What are the various proteolytic enzymes that act on proteins? And finally, all we know now that proteins are converted into a mixture of amino acids. Intact proteins are normally not absorbed in the case of adults. And these digested proteins or the amino acids, proteins after digestion, they produce amino acids. And these amino acids, they become part of an amino acid pool. Now, to this amino acid pool, the body proteins that undergo degradation, they also contribute to this. The non-essential amino acids that are synthesized in the body, that also contributes to this amino acid pool. Now, what happens to these amino acids? These amino acids are first and foremost utilized for synthesis of body proteins. The amino acids may undergo catabolism. Some of them could be used for synthesis of glucose and finally glycogen. Some of them may be diverted for synthesis of ketone bodies and fatty acids, and many of them then get converted into urea, and this is the nitrogenous waste product. So the end product of protein metabolism would be urea. Some of the amino acids are also utilized for synthesis of non-protein nitrogenous substances, for example, porphyrin, creatine. You have some hormones that are synthesized, purines, pyrimidines, the water-soluble vitamin niacin, and so on. Now, when we talk about protein metabolism, it is actually we are studying amino acid metabolism, and the first step in amino acid metabolism happens to be transamination. So what is transamination? It can be defined as, remember the word is transamination. तो क्या होता है? Transfer होता है. क्या transfer होता है? Amino group. कहाँ से? Obviously from the amino acid. किसको transfer होता है? To a keto acid. So transamination is the transfer of an amino group from an amino acid to a keto acid. And this results in formation of a new amino acid and a new keto acid. And this is usually mediated by enzymes which are referred to as aminotransferases. Aminotransferases are also called as transaminases. The active form of vitamin B6, water-soluble vitamin B6, is PLP or pyridoxal phosphate. This acts as a coenzyme for transamination reaction. Now, in these transamination reaction, there is only transfer of an amino group. There is no removal. That means free ammonia is not generated here. These reactions are reversible, and it also always involves a pair of amino acids and a pair of alpha keto acids. Let's have a look at some examples of transamination. These are the two most significant transamination reactions. So you have alanine that donates its amino group to alpha ketoglutarate. The enzyme is called as alanine transaminase. The alternative name is glutamate pyruvate transaminase. So alanine in the process gets converted to pyruvic acid, alpha ketoglutarate gets converted to glutamate. Similarly, for aspartate, the enzyme is called as aspartate transaminase or SGOT. That again donates its amino group to alpha ketoglutarate. Aspartate, after donating the amino group, gets converted to oxaloacetate. Alpha ketoglutarate gets converted to glutamate. So what we can see, the common feature is that alpha ketoglutarate in most of the cases acts as the amino group acceptor. And after transamination, most of these reactions converge at L-glutamate. This is because L-glutamate can be very easily deaminated. Now, what you should remember is that there are certain exceptions to this. So lysine, threonine, proline, and hydroxyproline, these happen to be amino acids that do not undergo transamination. SGPT and SGOT we'll see later, as they also have diagnostic importance. This particular process can also be used for synthesis of non-essential amino acids, and the alpha keto acids which are formed, they can be used for production of energy. So usually they ask you to define transamination and write the salient features. They also ask you for examples, so you should be able to cover these points. The next step would be deamination. So as the name indicates, to deaminate means to remove the amino group. That means from an amino acid, when the ammonia is removed, the process is called as deamination. This is catalyzed by enzymes called as deaminases. This process primarily takes place in the liver, but other cells and tissues are also involved in deamination. Deamination could be of two types. It's called as oxidative deamination and non-oxidative deamination. So as the name indicates, oxidative deamination simply means where deamination is accompanied by oxidation. And the most important deamination reaction is the one that is catalyzed by glutamate dehydrogenase. This is one of the most important deamination reaction. So as you can see in this reaction, so glutamate undergoes deamination with the help of glutamate dehydrogenase. For this reaction, NAD acts as coenzyme. In the process, glutamate gets converted back to alpha ketoglutarate and free ammonia or ammonium ions are generated. But if you see, this reaction is also reversible. And so what happens, ammonia is not just a waste product. What it can do is that when needed, it can combine with alpha ketoglutarate using NADPH as coenzyme, and it can result in synthesis of glutamate. Now, if you recollect, Shinde sir just told you in HMP shunt, what happens is HMP shunt, one of the significance is that this is a pathway that is used for reductive biosynthetic processes. So this is an example wherein reducing, so NADPH, that means the reducing elements that are generated in the HMP shunt, that is utilized for synthesis of amino acid glutamate. So what you must remember in biochemistry is that don't study it in compartments. Say that all these pathways are interrelated, and if you can remember the connections, it will make things easy for you. Now you also have D and L amino acid oxidases that have their own enzymes, specific enzyme. For example, L amino acid oxidase will bring about deamination of L amino acid. D-amino acid oxidase brings about deamination of D-amino acid. In both the cases, you get the generation of free ammonia and the corresponding alpha keto acids are produced. L-amino acid oxidases use FMN as coenzyme, and D-amino acid oxidases use FAD as coenzyme. Both of them, if you remember, FMN and FAD are the active coenzyme forms of vitamin B2. So you can remember this reaction when you give examples of these vitamins. Now, certain amino acids also have their own specific enzymes to carry out deamination. So, for example, OH group containing amino acids like serine and threonine, they have an enzyme called dehydratase, which can bring about deamination and form the corresponding alpha keto acid. Sulfur containing amino acid cysteine has this enzyme called desulfhydrase, which again removes ammonia and H2S and forms the corresponding alpha keto acid. Histidine has its own specific enzyme called histidase that gives you ammonia and urocanate. So once this ammonia is formed, actually problem abhi kya hai? This ammonia needs to be excreted. The problem is that ammonia can easily diffuse through the blood. It can enter the various cells and tissues, and this ammonia happens to be extremely toxic. I'll not go too much into the toxicity of ammonia. One is that the ammonium ions are extremely basic. They can alter the pH of the blood. The second very important thing is that it can combine with alpha ketoglutarate in the brain, and it can convert this into glutamate. But this is not the problem. The problem is the removal of alpha ketoglutarate, which is a very, very important intermediate of the TCA cycle. So therefore, the body has to think of some way of detoxifying ammonia and converting it into something less toxic. So the body does both the things. The detoxification process is achieved by converting or incorporating the amino group in the form of two amino acids. So you have glutamine and alanine, which act as the carriers of the amino group, and they take this amino group to the liver. And in the liver, the ammonia is converted into urea. So that's the next important topic that we are going to be taking up. Urea cycle has been asked very often. It's been asked in the form of an SAQ. It's also been asked in the form of an LAQ. Usually when it's an SAQ, they just ask you to give a diagrammatic representation. So what's this urea? It's the end product of protein metabolism synthesized in the liver. It's transported to the kidneys for excretion. This cycle was elucidated by Sir Hans Krebs and Kurt Hensely. It's also called as the Krebs-Hensely cycle. It's also called as the ornithine cycle. Now, this urea has two amino groups, one of which comes from ammonia, and the second amino group comes from aspartate. You need to remember this, can be asked in the form of MCQ. Now, the urea cycle happens to be a very simple 5-step process, and this takes place in the liver. 2 of the reactions take place in the mitochondria. 3 reactions take place in the cytosol. So let's have a look at this urea cycle. Now, what is the first reaction? Now, in the liver, you've got the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product. So in the form of bicarbonate, that's negatively charged, and you have the ammonium ions, which are positively charged. They combine together, 2 molecules. ATP are needed for this process. The enzyme that is involved is carbamoyl phosphate synthetase. Please remember and mention the enzyme as a synthetase and not as a synthase. So it's called as CPS1. Okay, now there is also another enzyme called as CPS2, which happens to be a cytosolic enzyme. So you can just remember when you write 1 or I, basically this I can mean inside. So this is inside the mitochondria. So this reaction is the rate limiting step of the urea cycle, and it requires NAG or N-acetyl glutamate as an activator. So when there is a lot of protein in the diet, proteins under the amino acids undergo transamination, glutamate is formed, and that results in formation of N-acetyl glutamate. So the carbamoyl phosphate is formed, and this carbamoyl phosphate now the carbamoyl group is transferred onto ornithine. Now ornithine is a product that is formed at the end of the cycle. So it's a cyclic process. So ornithine is regenerated at the end of the cycle, and this ornithine enters into the mitochondria. The carbamoyl group is transferred onto ornithine. So therefore the enzyme is called as ornithine transcarbamylase, and this converts ornithine to citrulline. Citrulline comes out of the mitochondria, and now it combines with amino acid L-aspartate. Again, effectively 2 molecules of ATP are utilized for this process. The enzyme is arginosuccinate synthetase. It gives you arginosuccinate. Now this arginosuccinate is broken down with the help of arginosuccinate lyase, which gives you arginine, and fumarate is formed as a byproduct, which can then, this can proceed to the TCA cycle. Arginine is acted upon by enzyme arginase, which utilizes a molecule of water, brings about hydrolytic cleavage, it forms urea as a byproduct and ornithine is regenerated. Okay, now don't be scared by the structures that I've drawn. You're not expected to remember the structures. You're only supposed to know the names. I just drew this just to tell you that though there are two amino acids that are involved in this process, so you've got arginine and aspartic acid that is part of the cycle. You'll find that structure-wise, citrulline, arginosuccinate, and ornithine also happen to be amino acids structure-wise. So they're just simply called as non-protein amino acids. So what is the significance of the urea cycle? Now, the main purpose of the urea cycle is to eliminate toxic ammonia from the body. This is the only cycle that's available to the body to convert the toxic ammonia into urea. The cycle is irreversible, consumes 4 molecules of ATP. It combines effectively 2 waste products, the bicarbonate and ammonium ions, helps to maintain acid-base balance. It's giving you fumarate as a byproduct that links the urea cycle to the Krebs cycle. Now, in healthy people, the normal blood urea concentration is between 10 to 40 milligrams per DL, while the blood urea nitrogen is between 7 to 20 milligrams per DL, and about 15 to 30 grams of urea is excreted per day in the urine. Okay. Now, this particular diagram simply tells you about the metabolic fate of the amino acids. You don't have to remember. I just put it up just to show you that amino acids after metabolism give you only a few end products. So as you can see, you get either alpha ketoglutarate, succinyl coenzyme A, fumarate, oxaloacetate, okay, or you get pyruvate, you get acetoacetyl coenzyme A or acetyl coenzyme A. So those amino acids which produce acetyl coenzyme A or acetoacetyl coenzyme A can use this to synthesize ketone bodies. Those which are giving you these end products, they can enter into the TCA cycle, produce energy, or when they form oxaloacetate, this can then be diverted for glucose biosynthesis. So the end product, when amino acids, the amino group is converted into ammonia and finally to urea, and the carbon skeletons are utilized either for synthesis of glucose or for synthesizing ketone bodies or for producing energy. Now, from this topic, actually, you'll find in your books there are metabolism of many important amino acids is given. It's actually very scary to see all that, but many questions from this has been asked in the form of MCQ. So maybe you can just remember a few important things. For example, how you need to remember. For example, you take, say, glycine. Now, what is glycine? Try to just recollect. It happens to be the smallest amino acid. It's a non-essential amino acid. The R group in the case of glycine happens to be hydrogen. So this is the only amino acid that does not show optical activity. Again, this can be asked in the form of an MCQ. Now, where is glycine required? It's a precursor for many important compounds. The whole molecule of glycine is incorporated for purine biosynthesis. Glutathione that we again studied in HMP shunt, it's called as glutamyl cystenyl glycine. So glutathione also contains glycine in its structure. Synthesis of creatine, and creatinine finally also requires glycine. Glycine combines with succinyl coenzyme A to form heme. Bile acids, glycocholic acid is, so glycine is a precursor. Many other important roles, for example, detoxification, glycine. So it's only size-wise glycine बहुत छोटा है, लेकिन काम बहुत बड़े-बड़े करता है. So detoxification में it combines with benzoic acid, it gets converted into hippuric acid, which is a normal constituent of urine. In collagen, you find that glycine is present in very large concentration. Right. Similarly, for tyrosine, the non-essential amino acid, it's a non-essential amino acid. I told you this is synthesized from phenylalanine. Now, tyrosine is a precursor for many important compounds. Melanin, the pigment that's present in the hair, the eye, skin, etc. The thyroid hormones T3 and T4 and the catecholamines are all synthesized using tyrosine as a precursor. Now, in MCQs again, you know, which one of the following, yeah, all of the following are synthesized from tyrosine except. So at least you should know what are the substances that are being synthesized from tyrosine. And I found in one of the recent papers, they had asked that when norepinephrine gets converted into epinephrine, what is the reaction that occurs? Okay, so they had given dehydrogenation, methylation, you know, some 4 different options were. So the catecholamines happen to be dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So remember, norepinephrine has no methyl group. So when a methyl group is added to norepinephrine, it gives rise to epinephrine. So which reaction converts norepinephrine to epinephrine? It's an example of a methylation reaction. Okay, so similarly, you have tryptophan, which is again an aromatic amino acid. It's needed in the diet, and it's a precursor for synthesis of the feel-good hormone serotonin. It produces melatonin, which is a hormone which regulates the sleep-wake cycles. It is also something that can synthesize vitamin B3, that is niacin, right? So moving on now, let's leave enzymes behind, but a lot of enzymes